It is now my honor to introduce someone I also admire, and that is U.S. Senator Dick Durbin. Please welcome him to the stage. What a pleasure.
What'd you do?
Running. I'm clumsy.
Oh.
So let me introduce you briefly, Senator. Senator Durbin is the convener of Illinois' bipartisan congressional delegation and serves as the Senate Majority Whip. He also serves as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and sits on the Appropriations and Agriculture Committees. Thank you so much for being here today. I am so glad that you are among us and able to share some of your thoughts with us today. My first question, Senator, is I think, when we're in Chicago, we forget that Illinois is an agricultural state. And I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the challenges that farmers, particularly here in Illinois, but across the country, are facing right now.
Number one in soybeans, number one in pumpkins, number two, sadly, in corn to the state of Iowa, a wonderful state. Senator Grassley reminds me of that every time I see him. Most of our agriculture is row crops, corn and soybeans, which is a different world of agriculture than those who are growing specialty crops, that's for sure. The problem, of course, is risk. Are you going to have weather that's cooperative with you? Is the growing season going to be long enough? Is the market going to be rewarding enough to justify your investment? And what about the added cost that's coming your way by way of equipment and chemicals? So I have been engaged in this debate for a long time, both as a member of the House and the Senate. And I can tell you there was a time when there were many unusual theories of agriculture, federal policy on agriculture. Parity was one of those, which actually goes back to the 40s and before. There were actual apostles of parity who came making their appeal every time there was a farm bill. But what we've arrived at now is crop insurance as really the fundamental program for row crop agriculture. Now let me quickly add that whenever you see the words federal and insurance in the same sentence, don't be misled. It is federal, but it's not necessarily insurance. Insurance, as you and I know it, is to pay on that policy for your automobile and to let the company collect enough money so if something terrible happens, they can compensate you for it. The risk pool on insurance. The risk pool on federal crop insurance involves a 60% federal subsidy. So the farmer is going to pay premiums, but the premiums cover at most 40% of the cost of the insurance if he ever needs it. Having said that, I think it's still a sound start and has been the basis for our farm bills for a number of years and will continue to be. I could add a couple things. One of them I want to say to you quickly is, if you imagine in your mind a farmer sitting on a tractor or one of those huge combines, get a photograph if you can. That's all changing. Go to John Deere's website and put in electrification and see what they envision for the future. Autonomous vehicles on the farm, guided by GPS and monitored by a computer in the old farmhouse, where the wife, who's usually the smartest one of the bunch, not the hardest working, well, maybe the hardest working, but certainly the smartest one, is actually put in charge of the big technical decisions and probably is sitting at that computer managing the autonomous farm vehicles. That's in the near-term future, I think, for major agriculture.
And what are your thoughts about that? What is your opinion? Is that the kind of agriculture you want to see?
Well, I think it's inevitable. It's like saying, well, are you in favor of electric vehicles or against them? Wait a minute, where do I get to vote and who's listening to how I vote? It's coming, and it means more profitability. It means major investments on the front end of it, but it's going to change the culture of farming quite a bit. Be fewer people directly involved in the operation as it moves along. Now, in a way that's necessary. I'm chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as you just heard. One of our major issues is immigration. I can't tell you how many different businesses and farms have come to me on the issue of immigration, saying they are desperate. They can't continue their operations without immigrants coming in and reinforcing our workforce. For example, A woman who has a dairy farm in northwestern Illinois says to me in my office, I'm the fourth generation, my family, on this dairy farm. There will not be a fifth generation unless I have immigrant workers on this dairy farm. I've got to milk those cows twice a day, and I can't find local people to help. A woman said, well, let me add to that. I have an orchard in southern Illinois, and we grow great peaches. This is probably our last year. And don't tell me to go to the local town and hire the high school kids. I can't even get them to man the air-conditioned fruit stand out by the highway. They have no interest in it. So when you look at the future of agriculture and see automation coming, it's almost inevitable because our immigration system is so broken.
Senator, you mentioned youth and how they aren't going back to farms. Do you think this idea of having more technological advancements on farms would bring youth back to Illinois, Iowa, all over the Midwest?
I hope so. But by and large, most people on the farm today are looking for the next opportunity, and most of them don't view farming as that opportunity. What used to be the, quote, family farm is now the corporate farm, much larger with many more people engaged in it. So it isn't like the old days when dad or your grandfather were leading the farming operations. It's a big corporate enterprise.
I want to come back to sort of what you started off talking about with, what is grown in Illinois and across the Midwest. But before I do that, last year President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which designated a lot of money for farmers and rural households. And I'm wondering what you think it means for farmers who are right now on the front lines of the climate crisis here in Illinois.
So I had this little exercise in my office in Washington. Every year, except for the COVID years, I have a visit from the major farm organizations. The biggest one in Illinois is the Farm Bureau. You may be represented here, I'm not sure. I hope you are. And the Farm Bureau would come in, and it usually was a meeting that was very predictable. They are the nicest people on earth, full stop. They are courteous to a fault, and they would never vote for a Democrat, well, most Democrats, under any circumstance, but it was always a good meeting. And there would be an inner ring of about a dozen farm owners, men, in their suits with white shirts and ties. Seated behind them were their wives, spouses, with purses on their laps in a Sunday dress. The men would do all the talking. Thank God that has changed, because as I said earlier, the women are a major part of agriculture. And so I started as a kind of just an exercise, maybe 10 years ago in my office, saying, I have a question for all of you. How many of you believe that with all the extreme weather that we're witnessing and the changes in temperature and all the things associated with it, that it has anything to do with human activity? Not a single hand went up. I thought to myself, no one here believes it has anything to do with what we're doing? No. I asked that question several years in a row and got the same response, no response. And I finally, in desperation, said to this one farmer who looked like a great fella, I said, explain to me, all of this is happening, what's going on? Well, Senator, some years God sends me a drought, some years God sends me a flood. I take whatever he sends me. So that's where it stood for a while, and then it started changing. And probably, I guess, 6 years ago, I'd get an occasional hand saying, I'm not sure. But the conversation was really being engaged, and they were starting to see the obvious around them. Things are changing. We have, on average, 54 tornadoes a year in the state of Illinois, 54. I grew up here. Getting up in the middle of the night, mom rousting you out of bed and saying, we're going to the basement to sleep on a spare bed. Anybody ever had that experience? Okay, welcome back to the Midwest. That was a reality. It was kind of an adventure for a kid. We never got hit by a tornado, thank God, but it was a little scary moment there until you fell asleep. So now those 54 a year tornadoes, so far this year, we've had 97 tornadoes in the state of Illinois. And they are no longer confined largely to summer months, they're year-round. Things are changing and you just can't avoid seeing it. So I've noticed more and more interest in conversations about climate, environment, and agriculture. I would say that the farm community, by and large, is reluctant to engage in the conversation because they're always suspicious of too much government interference in their lives and costing them profitability. But they're starting to listen. This notion of precision agriculture, which some of you may be familiar with, is really trying to take the information that you've stored in your computer, linking it up with the GPS signal from the ground for the planting and chemicals that are used in farming to reduce overhead costs and to be more effective. So it's coming, and it's coming slowly. For example, most of you know the story of Franklin Roosevelt deciding to extend electricity to farms across America. It was transformative. It changed the farmer's life overnight. I grew up in politics, still talking to people who remembered the day and remembered the night, the first night that they had electricity and electric lights in the farmhouse. It was just a life-changing event. So FDR made it work because he created the electric cooperatives and he extended electricity into rural and small-town America. Now we're dealing with a similar challenge when it comes to Wi-Fi, broadband.
Right.
These farms have got to have that access too. Joe Biden's bill that you mentioned earlier invested in that and will continue to. It's a good investment. And we're also in a situation here where we've got to start thinking about the future and what it means for agriculture and the cultivation of crops and the way that they're grown. That's happening. I can see that happening. I said to this one farmer, I want to tell you a story. I said, I went into business last year in Springfield, Illinois. He said, Senator, what kind of business do you go into? I said, I generate electricity. He said, how do you do that? I said, on the roof of my house. I'm the first one in the neighborhood to have solar panels on the roof of my house. And I said, my electric bill has gone from $120 a month to $20 a month. And that's the amount I contribute to help others pay their bills if they can't make it. I said, this is coming. Would you ever consider it for your farm? I'd consider it, he said. I have a hog operation, and I run fans 24/7. But he says, my problem is the electric co-op isn't geared for net metering yet. So what I'm presenting to you is a challenge for all of us to think of extending the possibility of solar panels and sustainable renewable energy sources means rethinking some of the roles of basic entities like electric co-ops. There is change underway in this state. I think it's going to come. And I think the people who engage in it and show that they can be a winning hand are going to convince their neighbors to do the same.
Yeah, farmers are risk adverse because they've had to be, you mentioned, this idea of infrastructure that's really needed, whether it's broadband or getting the electric cooperatives to change. But I'm also wondering if you're hearing from the farmers that you speak with, they see what's happening with the weather. You mentioned the top crops that Illinois grows when you started talking. Are they thinking about diversification and growing more kinds of resilient crops? We're at a summit about, helping people gain access to healthy, affordable foods. Soybeans, corn, those aren't the things that are actually nourishing people. They nourish livestock.
They largely do, although there are applications for both in general family consumption as well. I don't sense that there is going to be a move towards specialty crops. They have their own risk associated with them. My wife and I visit friends up in Leelanau Peninsula in Michigan. Some of you know that area up there. The cherry crop is beautiful to behold, but in many years it just doesn't work. When it works, it's great. So there's risk associated with that as well, and a front-end investment and a delay in return that slows them down. Plus, the row crop has created a lifestyle. The farmers in row crop farming are busier than hell for several weeks, planting several weeks, cultivating several weeks, harvesting. But their lifestyle is not a 24/7 commitment. Dairy farms are a different story. Milk that cow twice a day. It's a 24/7 commitment. So there'd be some lifestyle choices associated with changing crops. I hope it comes. I'd like to see more diversity in fruits and vegetables.
Sure, thank you, Senator. I want to go back to the Farm Bill, which you mentioned earlier, and I'm hoping you can give me a sense of best case scenario or worst case scenario.
I can speak only about the Senate. I do not understand what the hell is going on in the House. We're in good shape in the Senate for two reasons. Debbie Stabenow and John Bozeman. Debbie Stabenow, Democratic Senator from Michigan, is good. No, she's very good. And she has successfully engineered a farm bill through several years ago. There's just nobody better, and she's thrown herself heart and soul into the enterprise. And she's announced her retirement. Now, as tough as politics may be, there's a soft spot in our heart for somebody who's leaving, and we want them to leave on a high note, which means with a farm bill. Lucky for her, her partner in this process is John Bozeman, conservative from Arkansas and a real gentleman who works with her to put a bill together. I have confidence sitting on that committee that we will pass a farm bill. We will get it through in the Senate. God only knows what's going to happen in the House. I just can't tell you. I hope for the best. Failing to pass a farm bill would be disastrous.
Any thoughts on what the Farm Bill will mean for access and affordability for consumers, especially in urban areas, but also in rural areas, which face a lot of food security challenges?
You remember that part of the debate over the debt ceiling was the eligibility for food stamps? An agreement was reached, and I think we came out ahead on it. We agreed to some limitations in terms of food stamps, but we expanded the category of eligibility to include, for example, veterans and people with disabilities. So I think the net impact is to expand the reach of food stamps and SNAP program. And the announcement was made by the president and those who were engaged in it, for at least from the Democratic side. End of the story on SNAP. For 2 years ahead of us, this is going to be done according to this formula, and we're not going to renegotiate it. The Republicans wanted to restrict SNAP eligibility, and I hope they got the message that isn't going to happen. Having said that, if the Speaker of the House, his tenure as Speaker is at stake, God only knows what he's going to do.
That's unfortunate to hear, but we understand the difficult situation in Washington right now. I want to go back a few years because in 2011, the Food Safety Modernization Act, which you authored, was signed into law. And I'm wondering if you can explain why that act was so critical and how sort of the food safety landscape has changed over the last 10 plus years.
So in my callow youth, working my way through college, I worked in a slaughterhouse in East St. Louis, Illinois for 12 months. I saw firsthand what meat production looks like. It's not a pretty scene, and it's not an easy job. It's hotter than hell. It's loud. People get hurt, seriously hurt on the job, and it's a sobering experience, some of the aspects of that. I also came to know the U.S. Department of Agriculture inspectors who were on the scene with their white coats and white helmets, standing around watching things that may have been suspect. I'm not going to take anything away from them. We have one of the safest food supplies in the world. But having said that, the laws involving food inspection are crazy. Crazy. For example, if you have a pizza with sausage on it, it's responsibility of the USDA. If it's a cheese pizza, FDA. Broken eggs, one agency. Whole eggs, another agency. Madness, just total madness to try to understand how you would sort that out. So part of our responsibility with this modernization was to try to move forward with something that made sense in inspection and didn't protect little bailiwicks and kingdoms that are existing at the federal level. My partner in this, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention it, Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut. Many of you know her name. She is terrific, and she's been a great ally of mine over the years. Now, I would say the bill passed, the concepts were agreed to, but they have not been implemented at the pace that I'd hoped for. I think we can do a lot better. We can have better food inspection, and the FDA is now assuming a role in the area of food, which goes way beyond basic inspection. We hope this is a portent of good things to come, because food illnesses are still a serious problem. Rosa herself almost died as a child because of food contamination. So she tells that story very effectively when we're in negotiation.
Thank you. Thanks for the update. I think it's important that people understand that FDA is trying to reform its human foods program and really make those changes that are necessary so that we can all eat better and healthier and more safely. In our last few minutes here, I heard from your staff last week that something that is close to my heart is also close to your heart, and that's reducing food waste. And I'm wondering what strategies you've seen and what sort of recommendations you have for the private sector, many of whom are in the room today, about reducing food waste. Because for a lot of us, it's not just a moral challenge, it's also an environmental challenge.
I want to get into answering that directly, but starting at a different spot, if you will. One of my other passions has been the school lunch program. I don't know how many of you remember it or are familiar with it, but you ought to go to a school cafeteria and watch what's happening at lunchtime. I can remember a few years ago going to a brand new high school here in Chicago, Westinghouse College Prep. They couldn't wait to show off the computer lab, they couldn't wait to show off, and rightfully proud they were of what they had achieved. As we were leaving, I said, I'd like to walk through the cafeteria. I could tell the principal was a little uneasy with my decision. And she said, why? I said, I want to see what's for lunch today. The entrees for lunch were corn dogs and pizza slices. The vegetable, thank goodness there was a vegetable, tater tots. I said to her, how is this chosen? Well, that's what the kids want. Maybe true. As parents and grandparents, we know that kids will gravitate towards junk food unless they learn differently and are conditioned to think about food differently. If you watched in most of these school cafeterias, even the bad lunches, most of which were served, were thrown away in the trash can, more than half the food. I'd look at that and think, my God, it's not only bad to start with, they're throwing it away as part of it, so it's food waste. And the obvious question for us is there an alternative? Luke, where are you? Luke Saunders, are you here?
He's here somewhere.
He's here somewhere. Luke Saunders runs a company named Farmer's Fridge, you probably know. I was just asking him about what they do with the returns from Farmer's Fridge. I wish he could tell the story because he'd be more effective at it. But it turns out that the returns are first still fresh and usable for some applications, like through the Chicago Food Depository, one of the best. Kate Mayer, is she here? Well, Kate's my buddy. She's one of the best too. But they're consciously reducing the waste that comes with it. I think we don't have an alternative. I live in a condo here in a big old house in Springfield. In the condo here, there's a trash chute. What do you put in the trash chute? Whatever you have. Food waste, something that isn't quite recyclable. And we're just throwing away organic entities which are becoming part of landfills and creating problems in years to come. We've got to be more thoughtful about it. I went to one community where they had a compost collection unit. Any of you live in communities with that? Where are you from? Oak Park? In Evanston. As an aside, I once said that if the entire state of Illinois consisted of Oak Park and Evanston, I could go to bed election night at 7:05 and sleep like a baby. Thank you for what you do. We need more of it. I don't know what your ultimate process is, but we've got to be thoughtful about this as well.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. I think that's a great point to end on. I really appreciate you being here with us today. And thank you for your service to this country at a very difficult time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, hope you feel better.